Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. As part of my A to Z sewing techniques series, today I'll be showing you two different ways to sew a set-in sleeve. For both methods, we're going to start out with our shoulder seam and side seam sewn together and pressed on our bodice, and the seam on our sleeve sewn together and pressed as well. For our first method, we're going to sew basting stitches from our back notches towards our front notches, and we want to do this about 1/8 of an inch less than our regular seam allowance would be. So for me, my seam allowance on my patterns are 1/2 of an inch, so I am going to sew my basting stitch at 3/8 of an inch. To make easing our sleeve cap into our armhole a little bit easier, while we're sewing that basting stitch, I'm just putting my finger directly behind the foot, and what this is doing is helping the stitch gather up the fabric just a little bit. Once you've put your basting stitch into your sleeve, we can go ahead and attach our sleeve to our armhole. We're going to put our bodice inside out and then match our sleeve cap notch to our shoulder seam and pin that together. Also, you're going to want to pin your notches at their matching points as well as your side seam to the seam on your sleeve. Once your notches are pinned in place, you can see that for the most part your sleeve should match pretty well into your armhole without too much extra fabric. However, if you do have a little bit of excess fabric on your sleeve, you can pull the stitch that is the most taut and help gather in the fabric of the sleeve a little bit more so it can match up with your armhole perfectly. Once you're satisfied with the amount you've gathered your sleeve into your armhole, go ahead and put a few extra pins along the armhole edge just to keep the gathering in place. When you take it over to your sewing machine, be sure that the extension arm is off of your machine and that your sleeve is on the bottom with your bodice on top. That way the feed dogs underneath can help ease your sleeve into the armhole. Okay guys, here is our finished product from the first way that we can sew a set-in sleeve. If you want a quicker way to sew it in, stay tuned. We have a little bit more of an advanced method up next. For the second method, we're going to sew up our bodice on our sleeve the same way with our seams pressed open, and then we're just going to pin where our notches meet and where our seams meet at. And then we can take it over to our sewing machine. No basting stitch required for this one. For this method, I'm starting at the underarm seam and I am sewing like normal to our first set of notches. Once we get to the portion of the sleeve that needs to be eased into our armhole, you're going to take your left hand and you're going to put it between the two layers and you're going to help guide that bottom fabric, which should be your sleeve. You're going to help ease that into the armhole as you sew. Now to help you do this, you're going to take your right hand and you're going to hold your bodice fabric taut. You don't want to pull it so much that it's stretching it, but you want to help keep it taut. That way the feed dogs aren't pushing your fabric too quickly, but your sleeve fabric that's on the bottom side is being pushed quickly. Now this is a difficult method to master when you're first starting out, because with one hand you're pulling the fabric, with another hand you're pushing the fabric, and without any hands you're trying to guide your fabric to where you're sewing on the correct seam allowance. So this does take a little bit of time to get perfect, but once you do master this technique, it is super fast to sew your sleeves. And that is why so many professional sewers choose to use this method for mass production. And just like the last method, it sews a perfect sleeve, it's just a lot quicker. Now if you do notice a section that you didn't sew quite so perfectly and there's some puckering or there's little pleats, you can go ahead and pop the stitches just in those sections and go over them again, trying to ease that extra fabric in there without the puckers. Okay guys, if you like this video, hit the like button and let me know. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to me and you can see the next video in this series as soon as I post it. And if you haven't seen any videos in this series, then go ahead and check out the playlist that I have linked below.